Okay, good evening. I welcome you all. A happy end of Chanukah to all of you. Today we concluded the 8th day of Chanukah. And as I discussed last week, Chanukah is a celebration of light. But it has a lot more meaning than just that seemingly simple statement. So, in honor of Chanukah's conclusion and on the onset and the conclusion of 2011, going into a new year, which usually New Year, frankly, is for most people simply a day of party or vacation, or some people don't like it, some people love it, simply because it's the end of the fiscal year for many companies or whatever it is. But the Jewish perspective on things always gives a twist and a deeper significance. So though nothing's going to happen besides the ball falling, dropping, I should say, on, Saturday night? But nevertheless, because so many people are taken by an event, even though they may not have any spiritual significance, but it's a time of certain opportunity to make an accounting. And it's as good as any time. We obviously have our Rosh Hashanah, which we already honored and celebrated a few months ago. But accountability is always a good thing. So to review and look at our year and see where we're going seems an opportune time to do so, especially as I said, the timing is great as far as the end of Chanukah goes as well. I want to begin, being that we titled the class From Dark to Light. What will the new year bring? So, darkness and light has many meanings besides just the physical properties of darkness and light, of night and day. It also refers to our own states of mind, of darker states and brighter times, moods, and the different vicissitudes we all go through. So, in that spirit, I want to begin by saying that this class is in honor and memory of I didn't know her personally, but through her grandson and grandchildren, you can tell somewhat what a person is like. David and Zach and your whole family's, your grandmother and your mother's mother, Maria, Devinki, and her Hebrew name Malcah, Chana bat Rifka, and Shlomo. We just passed right before Chanukah on the 17th of Kislev, and Chanukah always begins on the 25th of the Hebrew month of Kislev, so this was exactly a week before. So I think it's appropriate because, when we live in this world, our souls are concealed, and the primary experience we have is our body experience. The senses take over. But at those moments of transition, when a soul ends one leg of its journey and continues on to the next, it awakens everyone to think about the soul's journey. Because now we can't look at a body any longer. So all you have left is the soul. And when you really think about it, that's really the person you love. You don't love a person's body and corpse, so to speak. I don't mean to sound morbid, but you love the personality, the spirit, the person, the entire person of the entire persona and individuality of a human being that happened to be cased inside of a body. Like I always answer the question that people ask, where does a soul go to upon death? That the question itself is a arrogant presumption that we are where it's at and we wonder where the soul goes to, when in fact it could be the other way around. Actually, it is the other way around. It would be like a refrigerator asking electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? And the response of electricity, of course, is, what do you mean where I go to? What kind of arrogant question is that? You're a little box that they just invented the last century or two, and I go with where I always was. You're not where it's at. Electricity is not contained by time and space. The fact that human beings were able to invent a little refrigerator, or for that matter any appliance, and contain me, doesn't mean that you'll control me. So I go back to my natural habitat. And the same is true with the soul and the body. We are so consumed by our perspective in this earth that we think matter is what we see with our eyes. And we're so seduced by the sensory stimulation of our lives that we end up deluding ourselves into thinking this is where it's at. And when you really just apply yourself even for a few minutes, Even where it's at, we don't even know most of what life is all about. Yeah, look at your own human body. A human body, 5-6 feet tall, 100 pounds, 150 pounds. We'll stop there. And pretty. I would say a pretty, in the scheme of things, in the scale of the universe, is a pretty small entity, a human body. And how much do we know about this body? How much do we know about this brain that's the size of the palm of our hand? And even not just lay people, as doctors, as scientists. The more they know, the more they realize how much there is to know. So this is meant to say that we don't have knowledge, and we should not honor and respect the knowledge and science that we've accumulated. But true knowledge really ultimately is just really climbing the mountain of recognizing that the horizon is much greater than we can ever fathom. And we know very little even about this stage of life, let alone the electricity outside of the box. So when you talk about thinking out of the box, or out of the bun, as some marketers have defined it, the fact is it's very cute and very cool to think out of the box, but not many people really think out of the box. Because we are trapped by the box, and it defines our perspectives. It turns us into subjective creatures, self-interest, and all the other myopic views and perspectives on life come from this box. And just like the refrigerator, we think where it's at, and we wonder where the soul goes to. When you think about it, it's really the other way around. That we are one little step in a long marathon, in a big scheme of things. And even this step, as I said, is quite mysterious, let alone that which is beyond and before and after us. So, in the spirit of a neshama, a soul that continues its journey, we always have to know that soul sees us even though we can't see it. The fact that we can't see things does not mean it's not there. It means that we can't see behind the curtain. And there are many things we can't see. We also can't see microscopic matter, energy. We can't see energy in this room. We can't see all the forces that shape us. We don't see DNA, cells, atoms, as I said, subatomic particles, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the fact of it is, especially today, you don't even need faith and religion to know that what defines the universe is energy, not matter. And once Einstein, E equals mc squared, that energy equals matter. Just a question of how one converts into the other. The fact of the matter, the universe that we see, that we experience, is the outer layer of many frequencies. Someone just sent me actually a quote. I couldn't memorize it. It was a little too poetic. So I'll just read it to you. I hope I saved it here. It's from one of the great physicists in the 20th century, Max Planck. So here's what he said in a lecture. I thought it was a nice way to put it. He says, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about atoms this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force, which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. The mind is the matrix of all matter. Max Planck. And by no means is this if I had not quoted who it was, many people would think it's some mystic, or some rabbi, or some Buddhist thinker, or something like that. But today, especially in the quantum mechanic level, science parallels in fascinating ways ideas that are deeply embedded in mystical thought, which is that the world is really energy. It's a field of energy. And the fact that we identify with matter is because we have narrow perspective on things. I don't know if any of you saw that TED conference talk by, what was her name? Neuroscientist. Some of you know, remind me the name. But you can look it up. You're familiar with the TED conference talks, you can see them online. If you aren't, so now you know. They're pretty fascinating talks. So there's like in 15 or 18 minutes, people give these brilliant ideas. I mean, some are better than others, obviously. So there's this neuroscientist, her name slips me, but eludes me. But anyway, she went into neuroscience because her brother was a schizophrenic. And therefore she had she gravitated to try to understand, in some way it helps perhaps try to unravel the mystery. So she went into neuroscience. She became a neuroscientist. And then, as one could say, luck would have it, she suffered a stroke. And she talks about the stroke. It's a fascinating talk. And basically, being a neuroscientist, she knew exactly what was happening to her brain, scientifically. And it was a gradual stroke. It wasn't like one extreme. So she saw a basic part of her brain shut down. So what shut down? It was the left. It was the stroke was on the right side, which was basically her left brain shut down. And we know there's the right brain and the left brain. In the last a few decades, 20 years ago, there was the famous book "Drawing on the Right with the Right Side of Your Brain." It was a big hit. It was like there was the classic example when you try to draw. I mean, some people are natural artists. Most of us are not. And if you think you are, try to draw a face, and you'll see immediately how good you are. He could see a face, and why can't you just draw it? Why is it not easy to draw? Looking at it. Study a face will give you 20 hours, will give you 1,000 hours. You won't be able to replicate a face on paper. The question is why? And why someone can do it and someone can't. Can you train someone? Is it natural skill? So she uses an exercise there in that book. This is not the neuroscience. I'll get back to her in a minute. That she gave a class, an art class to a group of students, like 20 students, and she gave them a picture to replicate. It was Abraham Lincoln, I think. Very famous image. Everyone knows Abraham Lincoln with a beard on the penny, the Lincoln penny. And of course, very few were able to get anything even close to the image. Even though they had a picture of Abe Lincoln, it wasn't from memory, they couldn't replicate it. Then she tried this exercise. She said to everyone, turn the picture upside down. Turn Abraham Lincoln's picture upside down, and now draw it. And there was like 80% improvement. Not everybody, of course, still wasn't a great job, but you could really recognize Abraham Lincoln. When they were not looking at a face, they were just looking at lines and shades and shadows without thinking of it as a face, they were able to draw a replica. In other words, what's so ironic about it is the fact that you see it as a face is precisely why you can't draw it, because you don't see it as a composite of details, you just see the whole image, and that's impossible to replicate. A true artist knows how to break it down into parts, and it's not just about, okay, I'll just look at the forehead or the eyebrows or the eyes or the nose or the complexion or whatever, or the profile. But there's something that when we see the whole thing, we get deceived and we're unable to create it. Anyway, she makes the point is that drawing is really with the right side of your brain, not with the left. And I'm sorry, the other way around. I mean, art is really with the right side of your brain. You just see things as a one image, but you need to break it into details to be able to draw. And I'm by no means giving here an art class. I'm just using it as an example. So she makes the point, going back to the neuroscientist, what happened was she had the stroke, and she literally knew that her left brain was shutting down. And so this is like one of the rare occasions where neuroscientists themselves can see themselves as the specimen, as an experiment, of seeing how one part of the brain works without the other part. So because we have our right and left brains working all the time, simultaneously, we don't really see the distinction at all times. What happened was, and this is the way she describes it, you can listen to it yourself. She essentially says the right brain sees things as a field of energy. There is no such thing as details. Everything is energy. So you look at a room, you do not see a wall and a table and chairs and people. You see one flowing energy that has many details in it. And the left brain sees details. So she was unable to, for example, brush her teeth as she was going through this stroke. She was unable to focus on any detail. She was able to relate to the concept, but she was unable to focus on any details. So obviously in life, to be able to live in a material world like ours, that is defined by time and space, we need a left brain that brings things into details. But it's the right brain that really makes sense of existence. And if you were to cut out the left brain for a moment, God forbid it should happen to anyone, but if you were able to isolate it, what you'd end up seeing is one field of energy, which is exactly the way the mystics explain existence, and it's exactly the way the quantum physicists explain it. That there's some type of invisible quilt or blanket, some call it string theory, that connects everything. And what we're witnessing is only the pieces, and the blanket is invisible. So right now there's a blanket that's connecting us all, a field of energy, but we can't sense it, so we see ourselves as distinct individuals. So of course, the objective, especially in Jewish mysticism, is how do you fuse the two, where you can both have a unity without compromising individuality. Think of it like a musical composition, which I think is an excellent example for it. Or, for that matter, a work of art. But let's take a musical composition. So anyone who plays music, or even if you listen to music, you don't need to be a connoisseur. You know, music is made up of sounds. It's made up of many details. And when it's played in stages, and it's with rhythms and notes and different changes throughout it all. But when you hear music, when it's played in the right order, symmetrical fashion, you sense one flow. You don't sense a bunch of details that someone just patched together, or else it wouldn't sound like music. That's what makes when you say music to the ears. You know, you say something resonates. You're sensing a field of energy that is really more than the sum of the parts. And if someone were to play the music, the notes in the wrong order, or play them not in a proper way, you'd suddenly would be grating on your ears. It wouldn't be calming. It would be disturbing. It would be noise. So essentially, music is a perfect example. Because on one hand, it's made up of details. There's no way that a musical composition can be just a flow. It does have details. And anyone playing the instrument knows that they have to shift and they have to change as they go and they play whatever it is, whatever stage of the composition they're playing. But the sum total of it is a flow. You wouldn't call it a particle, you'd call it a wave. You wouldn't call it a composite of details, you'd call it one flowing message or one flowing feeling. Now in life, the world we live in is a very fragmented world. And as such, we could, or let's put it, I should rephrase that. It's not really a fragmented world. In our perception, it's a fragmented world. And as such, we see things, we look at details and we try to make sense and put them together. But in the most natural state of affairs, everything is really one field of energy. Now, I say this because now I go back to Chanukah. Chanukah is a festival of light. Long before, thousands of years actually, before Einstein, before quantum mechanics, before light became such a critical component in understanding the universe. Because light is not just light is energy. Light is the boundaries of existence. And so on. We were celebrating Chanukah, the festival of light. So, I'm not saying everyone appreciated the depth of it, but, because you could say, okay, fine, they lit a menorah in the temple, and then the Greeks defiled and desecrated the temple, and they found a pure vial of oil, and it burned for 8 days. So we celebrate Festival of Lights. Very simple. You could tell anyone the story. There don't any depth to it. But when you really think about it, it's really the celebration of light. Why light? I mean, the real victory of Chanukah was the war that they fought against the Greeks, and they won the war. That's why they were able to rededicate the temple and find this oil. And yet we don't really honor the battle or the victory. We honor it through seemingly an incidental thing, that they relit the menorah. Because the truth is, the essence of the celebration is the understanding of existence as light. So if we were able to look at this world and all the details and the particles of this world as potential fuel of illumination and warmth, imagine what kind of life you would have. The problem is we become trapped, as I said, and therefore we become part of the problem, not just part of the solution. That we ourselves see ourselves as details, and we don't get the sense of this field of energy. If you had a sense that you were connected to everything around you all the time, all people, and I'm not saying it in some type of like touchy-feely way, but in a fundamental sense of it, your whole life would be different, because that means you'd understand there's a bigger plan. Nothing could really faze you. We are affected, and fear is a direct result of a matter-oriented orientation, as opposed to an energy orientation, which I will elaborate upon. And that is why, as we conclude Chanukah and we go from dark to light, it's a great opportunity to look at this year. You know, I travel around and I deal with many people, so I can give you I take the pulse of human beings, the human condition. And you see, of course, this last few years have been very volatile years. You know, going back to 2008, 2007, there was this bubble, what they call the illusion of everything is just going to be perfect. Technology is only going to get better. And our only issue is which iPad you buy at what stage, and that's that. And then the recession hit, which anyone with any seichel or any intelligence understands that anything in this material world doesn't last. The material world, by definition, is an eroding and an aging world. Energy is forever, but matter is not. But its seductive power is so intense that when you have it, you think you can have it forever. It deludes you into thinking you have something that is forever, but it's not. So it's affected people in very dramatic ways. This past year for some has been a very difficult year, in a very basic level, job security, homes, financial situation. There are definitely people who found opportunities, and I know many that will say that they had a very good year in many ways. But one thing is for sure, and you can sense it, that there's a deep tentativeness, psychological tentativeness, even among the people who don't have any financial worries, because there are many, many factors that are accumulating that create, at least on a subconscious level, a certain fear of the unknown. When you look at such changes taking place in the Middle East, for example, I'm not even talking now as a Jew in Israel. There's the fact of such dramatic change in the Arab world. Imagine just it spreads out to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the source of oil in the United States. What do you think will happen? Whatever you see is nothing compared to a regime change or a civil war in Saudi Arabia. So nobody even wants to contemplate it because it's like a nightmare for many. Because we are addicted to oil, economy, and money, it talks. It can be that can be like cataclysmic effect on the world. Now, I'm not a naysayer, nor trying to paint a negative picture. I'm definitely not a prophet of doom. I'm not a prophet altogether. Definitely not one of doom. But if you're little brains in your head, we live in a world that is extremely volatile and is becoming increasingly so. The next thing is technology has amplified everything. Everyone knows everything immediately. So once upon a time, something happened. You may not even have found out about it in your lifetime. Your grandchildren would know that it happened. But today, something happens. One little tremor anywhere in the world. Besides the fact that the 24/7 media stream has to report every stupid detail to ad nauseum, and they have to, they march on all the experts on, about anything, and then there's the competition. It's called the information revolution, or better put, the information deluge. So we're overwhelmed by all these details, and things got much more. Whatever, if you have a little fear of something, you see it amplified that many times over, the fear is so much greater. So we live in a world that's very volatile, very volatile. They predict that Europe will be a Muslim continent in the next 20, 30 years, simply by the numbers. Now, I'm not saying this in any way to scare anyone. I'm not saying necessarily, that's not an anti-Muslim statement, but that's a change, a pretty dramatic change, first time in history. Europe is like, the arrogant Europe. So some Jews say they deserve it after what they did to the Jews. Now that the Muslims do to them what they did to the Jews in Europe. Fine, I'm not going to get into some spitting contest about this, but the point is that whatever was going on to the Jewish people, and especially in Israel, the volatility and the unknown is now pretty much a global. Look at like North Korea. Okay, North Korea, you think of some little, who really cares, some obscure little country somewhere. It's like headlines, major thing. Now, whether it's a real fear or not a real fear, nuclear arms, whatever you want to call it, but we live in a global village and everything affects everything. So there's no question that this 2011 has been pretty dramatic, probably one of the most dramatic in my lifetime. Not that I'm the oldest guy around, but I'm a baby boomer, so I come after World War II. World War II, I guess, was pretty serious. But it's been a volatile year. They call the Arab Spring. Some call it now the Arab Winter, whatever you want to call it. And you have the economy, and you have all the unknowns. And of course, politicians in the year of election, just everybody is emotionally is trying to psychologically manipulate us, whether it's fears or hopes and so on and so forth. So you can't even know what like people say, you just can't trust what anything that comes out of anyone's mouth in a year of an election. You have to wait until after they're elected if you want to start hearing reality. Even then, you don't hear reality necessarily. So there's a lot of. I'm not going to go through the list of the 2011. I'm sure at the end of the year now, next week, you'll have all the week reviews of the 2011 events, the year in pictures, the year in the news, etc., etc. But volatility is definitely a word that captures this year in a very dramatic way. And what it does to us as individuals is either you stick your head in the sand and you just say, it doesn't matter to me, which if works for you, fine. Or when you think about it, it could be quite terrifying. Or if you're riding high, whatever it is that you're holding on to, and you have a big estate or something, then of course you can be oblivious in a different fashion. As I speak now as a Jew that's been around, I don't mean me, I mean as our nation, for thousands of years, we're not afraid to look at the abyss. We're not afraid to look at difficult times. And frankly, this, if you compare it in the context of history, this is not really called difficult. This is the challenges of prosperity. Difficult was when we were running for our lives, when there were Nazis or Cossacks or communists or pogroms. So frankly, all this is relatively a blessing. But nevertheless, everything is relative. The fact of the matter is there are many people that are very, very disturbed. And then I didn't even throw into the equation the ongoing problem that precedes 2008 and is not even, it's almost a timeless problem, the issue of relationships. So relationships are still in crisis. Even though they say during recessions and when there's volatility, marriage rates go up, divorce rates go down, because I guess people look for more companionship and are more scared to just go out there on their own. So I don't know if that's a good statistic, a bad statistic, I don't know. You can analyze that any way you like. But as I said, the question really is on a personal level, which is what I want to address. Each of you know what you're feeling inside of you. I can't speak for you. So I'm sure, I covered all the bases by saying either it was a bad year, or it was a good year, or no change took place, right? That pretty much covers it all. Or some things were not so good and some things were good, So I want to address that from all different perspectives, because no matter how you look at it, as I said, even if you've been blessed and more or less immune to a lot of these changes, nevertheless, the world is definitely going through serious change. And I could just speak from one perspective, for example, the publishing world, like the music world. They're terrified because the world is going into digital. Look what happened to the music business. Basically, the CD, the LP, the physical music vehicle no longer exists. Everything became digital. So iTunes took advantage of that situation. The publishing world is terrified of what will happen as text becomes digital. Because all these old dinosaurs and all the old mechanisms are very concerned about the future. Now we all know, it takes a dinosaur a long time to die, but they have a lot of power. So we are in a very big transitionary world. Whatever we see today with the internet is just the dawn, the Wild West still, relative to where it's going to be. So we're living in a very transitionary period, and all transitions are always very unpredictable, and therefore can be quite unsettling. So on a personal level, which of course is the key thing to focus on, I'm not here to talk about a global scope, but on a personal level, each of us have our challenges, each of us have our difficulties, and we want to be able to look at a new year coming and be able to enter it with a new attitude. I want to suggest a few things, especially in the context of this light and energy thing, that can be very practical as well. But first, on a conceptual level, I want to share part of the story of this week's Torah chapter. There's a thing called the victim mentality. If you look it up in Google, so you have all these clinical definitions of victim mentality. Victim mentality is usually defined as someone who feels that everyone's out to get them. So if they're fired from a job, it's because the boss had an axe to grind. It's not about you, it's always about blaming somebody else. And a certain type of victimization, which, even if we're true, the joke goes, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean no one wants to get me. Okay, you want to think about that and then laugh? Or was it? The fact of the matter is, even if there is a conspiracy out there, the question is, what does a victim mentality do to you? All of us were at some point vulnerable, impressionable children, completely at mercy in the hands of our parents. That's a given. There's no child born that is not defenseless. Which is why, of course, it's so painful and horrible to see a child being hurt, because a child is the only defenseless creature. And if the parents and close people to this child don't protect the child, who will? Strangers? street. So all of us are born in a world where we are, for the earliest part of our lives, which is of course the most important part, are at the mercy of who is our caretaker. And if they're healthy and nurturing, thank God, it will change your whole entire life. And if they're not, it will also change your entire life. So you can easily take on the victim mentality and say, you know what, my problems began long before I had any control. It was what my parents did. It was what my environment did, what my school did, the peers, whatever. The whole environment that shaped us. So even if you're right, even if you grew up in a very dysfunctional and unhealthy environment, and it's not about you, but it's about what the environment did to you, so then what are you essentially saying? Is that you're resigning yourself to being a victim. That's too late for me. I can't do anything about it. Some call the damaged goods syndrome. Damaged goods, which of course in many ways is far worse than the original problem. Because even if it's true, and I'm just using an extreme example just to make the point, obviously, and hopefully most of us are not in an extreme situation, but an extreme situation, then I'll carry it over to a more average scenario. So even if it's true, and there are unfortunately more people than we think growing up in horrible circumstances, broken homes, unhealthy parents that were not there, absentee, or outright abuse, not just overt abuse. So a child like that, what is really the hope for a child growing up like that? They didn't see love in their lives. Or what they saw was very distorted love. They saw love that came with a lot of pain and hurt. So if you're of a fatalistic school of thought, you could argue, it's the blind leading the blind. It's a vicious cycle. If you grew up under the influence of unhealthy forces, you're going to be an unhealthy force, and that's it. You cannot change your colors, your stripes. And that is why many people, and I say many again, people that I've been exposed to, many don't want to bring children into this world. They say, I was hurt as a child. I don't want to bring children, I don't want to hurt children as I was hurt. I've heard this. I'm sure some of you may have heard this. Because it tears your heart apart when you hear someone say that, because essentially they're not just saying that I was hurt, you're saying that you don't even have confidence in yourself that you can change the course of destiny, that you can change things because you were hurt. Maybe you learn from it, which means the person doesn't even have that confidence, which to me is even worse than the original problem. So in secular psychology and science, you can make a very strong argument, the fatalist argument, which is that we are not really in control of much. By the time we're age 7 or 8, they say you already have your mindset, the way you're going to think, the way you're going to solve problems or not going to solve problems. If your parents were in denial, you're going to be in denial, and this is out of your control. Because it happened at such early age, there's no way you can get out of that, because it's all subconscious. It's not like, somebody 20, 30, 40 years old, they're already shaped adult, something happens, you're much more resilient. You're much more able to take the punch and adjust. When you're a little child, as one of the examples given for it, you're like a warm ball of wax. Every experience is engraved inside that warm ball of wax, and as it hardens, it becomes part of your personality. So there's an expression in Hebrew, there's teva, meaning your nature, and there's teva sheni, hergel nasa teva sheni. Or hergel nasa teva, which means routines, habits, can become second nature, or even first nature. Essentially, nurture can become nature. When we say things are, is it nurture or is it nature? Were you born that way, or was it acquired? The fact is, when it's acquired early on, you almost can't tell whether it's innate or not. Because it can actually reshape how you are. As they say, the way the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. So things we experience at young age, impressionable age, will have very profound impact. There's no doubt about that. The question is what happens afterwards. So if you take a very fatalistic view on mankind and the human being, you could say, you can definitely minimize maybe the damage, but can you really change things? It's too bad. You can't turn the clock back. You didn't see love in your life, how are you going to bring love into your own life? You're going to repeat what you saw. You saw two people, your parents, fight all day, that's what you're going to bring into your relationship. That is definitely a perspective out there. Nobody likes to announce it that way because it's not very popular. And who wants to pay a therapist that's going to tell you that? If I'm hopeless, why am I paying you? To talk about it? Like the joke goes, the guy is dysfunctional in every relationship he screws up. And then, and he agonizes over it, and agonizes and agonizes. And finally he goes to this therapist, that therapist. Finally tells his friend, I finally found a therapist to solve my problems. He says, and now what? He says, I'm still dysfunctional, but now I don't feel guilty about it. So for some therapies, basically making you at least not feel bad about your own flaws. We're not even talking about healing. So I'm here to tell you, and Chanukah tells us the message, the exact antithetical message, that there is no such thing as really being a victim. Victim mentality is your creation. No matter what happens to you, you have the power and the ability not to become a victim. And this essentially is the question is darkness and light. Who dominates? And I say darkness and light, I mean obviously not just in a physical sense of the word, even though the physical light and dark is a good metaphor. As I mentioned last week, and I mentioned, it says in many, many Torah books, it says, Ma'at deich har b'cheshach, a little light dispels much darkness. As opposed to fire and water, which are two adversarial forces. Enough fire can evaporate large bodies of water, enough water can extinguish large fires. So when they meet, they are at war. And you see the war. You see the fire bubbling, the water bubbling, the fire crackling, and they fight in the way water and fire will fight. Until one will dominate over the other. One will. When it comes to light and dark, when light meets dark, again, you don't even need a laboratory for this. What happens when light meets dark? There's no war. It's not like fire and water, the darkness fights with the water, with the light, and the light with the darkness. Light automatically is a natural dominant element. Now, of course, if it's a very large, dark room, little light won't dispel all the darkness, simply because you don't have enough of it. But in the area where you bring the light, the darkness automatically, literally moves aside. Now, of course, I'm not trying to talk about light and dark or fire and water in the human sense of the word, but still, they have properties. And this is a clear property. So, this becomes a metaphor in Jewish thought of light and dark, of wisdom and ignorance. Wisdom and ignorance are the same thing. They're not competing forces. Yes, of course, a person who's an ignorant person, giving them power and weapons and control, can destroy a lot of wisdom. But all things equal, wisdom will always outmaneuver ignorance, because ignorance is basically the absence of wisdom, like darkness is the absence of light. It's not like fire and water. So basically, it becomes a metaphor for also a different psychological Weltanschauung, a different psychological perspective on human beings. You are essentially a body of light, or using the words I used earlier, a field of energy. That's what you are. And matter, dead and dark matter, and I'm specifically using scientific terms that are also recent revelations of how that the bulk of the universe today is dark matter. They call black, the dark matter or dark energy. And that you are essentially a body of light, an agent of light, and a field of energy, each of us. However, that energy can be concealed. Like I mentioned, a soul can be concealed inside of a body, like electricity can be concealed inside of a refrigerator, and the refrigerator convinces itself that it is what matters, and the electricity is some secondary, meaningless, or a superimposed reality, when really it's the other way around. So it's like a glove, a hand inside of a glove. And when the hand is inside the glove, we identify mostly with the glove. Because our sensory tools that so dominate our lives, to a point we can't even imagine. How many senses were stimulated today in your life? Your visual, sound, taste, touch, and smell. How many, did you even have respite? You have 5 minutes of the day where your senses are not being stimulated. 1 minute in the day. It's not the case. Because we live in, besides the fact that we're not even talking about the marketing element of the universe that is constantly inundating us and demanding and working overtime in hyper-stimulating our senses, but just the fact is, your eyes are open, the things you see, the things you hear are become the most dominant factors. We say Shema, the prayer, we put our hands over our eyes. It's symbolic to tell you that if you want to experience something real, you have to close your eyes. People who kiss or love each other, they don't have to have their eyes open. As a matter of fact, they will close their eyes. Sometimes, not sometimes, the more the real the experience, the less the senses become so significant. Now let me just qualify that. That doesn't mean that love cannot be expressed through looking at someone, or being looked at, or through your senses. But love is not a sensory experience. Love is a supersensory experience that manifests in the senses. So if your senses are like instruments of the love, then it's very powerful. But if the senses are the primary thing, and the feelings within are secondary, then it's like the hammer telling the hammer telling the hand what to do, when it should be the other way around. It's the soul that is the primary force inside your life. The flame. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the flame of God is the soul of a human being. And hence the flames of Chanukah, light. The power of light is who you are. And from the moment you're born, well actually I would say, let me correct that. Even before you're born, your soul is a flame that has been traveling from the beginning of time. And then at some point of conception, in some miraculous way, did some light just go out or something? Huh? Okay, it's fine. Maybe we're getting a demonstration here. So at some point, God in His mysterious ways, as the Talmud says, there are three partners in a newborn child. There's the father and mother, and there's God. Because your father and mother can do everything. A seed that can fertilize an egg, and not necessarily will conceive, etc., etc. So there's this moment of conception where this flame of your soul suddenly has touched matter and has ignited it, and it starts becoming what we call a fetus, an embryo that will turn into a life, a child. But don't think that that's when life began. Life, when we say our birthdays or the beginning of life, we're defining it as life touching this planet, this plane. But the flame was there before. Except, as I mentioned before with electricity, it was not contained by any box. So now it enters into this material plane to the point that the material conceals the flame. That's how bizarre the twist is. That reality gets concealed inside the glove, and now we are experiencing the senses. So when we celebrate light, we're basically declaring that I am a flame. Now this child is born into a home, and let's take the worst case scenario. The home is a very unhealthy home. That doesn't mean the flame gets extinguished. That doesn't mean the flame gets damaged. That means that the flame doesn't have an opportunity to express itself. That's what it means. What healthy parents do is nurture. Like a gardener. A gardener does not create seeds. A gardener does not create flowers. A good gardener cultivates, nurtures the ground, waters it, cares for it, and makes sure the weeds are cut away and the flower can emerge. The beauty of a human being and the greatness that you can achieve, no one can ever give you. It's all inside your flame, long before you even entered this world, came down to earth. What happens, however, is, this is the challenge of life. It can get trapped inside this box, and if you don't have the nurturing environment, it remains trapped, waiting to be released. This is, in the best way I can sum up, in a certain way, but of course there are many ways to express it, Torah psychology, Jewish psychology. This is a human being. So there's no such thing as damaged goods. There's no such thing. Yeah, there's mysterious things happening. See, I think there's a soul in here. More than a soul, many souls. Remember, souls don't occupy space. There can be trillions of souls right in this room right now. I like that. That would be pretty empowering, right? We'll talk about existential loneliness in a moment. So basically what happens is, there's no such thing as damaged goods, victim. You are a soul and will always remain a flame. As I said, the question is whether the flame has an opportunity, has a platform to express itself. Think of it like a healthy heart, but infected arteries, or blocked arteries, God forbid. So the heart can be bumping away and doing everything it should be doing, but it can't express itself. Because the arteries, the channels that bring the blood from the heart to the rest of the body are blocked, or not blocked, or are constricted, some way limit the flow. Look at a newborn child, a healthy newborn child, and you see seamlessness, through and through. a child breathes, you see the chest heaving up and down. Child is, and I've recently been experimenting with this because I have, thank God, a few little grandchildren. So I watch how we were once in perfection, That's the template before it got messed up a bit, like freshly fallen snow. So children are seamless flow. Their lungs are being used completely. But then what happens is you start breathing toxins. And then at some point, I don't know what age it is, that you usually don't, you end up using maybe 80% of your lungs. Which is why when you take a deep breath in, you usually cough. Because we don't really breathe all the way to the bottom of our lung, because that part has become reserved for some toxic waste that's hanging around there. Now, of course, exercise and conditioning, you can keep it going. That's what health is. Health is a flow. That's what it's called, a flow. Just like blood flows, breathing. It's a flow. Rhythm. Exhale, inhale. Contraction, expansion. What the mystics call rotze and shuv. Tension and resolution. Ebb and flow. All energy in life requires these two poles. Negative and positive. You go, you return. You, as I said, you exhale, you inhale. You take a step forward, you integrate it. Tension, and then the resolution. So that is the way it should be flowing. However, if the child grows up in an environment that is not healthy, what happens is, like the heart, I'm talking now psychologically speaking, the human being can't express itself. When a child is silenced by an abusive adult, again and again and again. When the child is lied to, when the child is hurt. So in the beginning, like every one of us, we have a certain resilience. We can take one slap, one blow, another blow. But at some point, it becomes kind of persistent. The child begins to adjust, unfortunately. And they begin to lock away inside themselves the real flame. Which is why you hear ideas, for example. Now again, I'm using extremes simply to drive the point home. You hear ideas like out-of-body experiences. The inner child. And a lot of therapy later is about how to free that person who's locked themselves away because they don't want to be hurt. That's what you do. That's why really horrible experiences, again I apologize for mentioning anything that is very painful, but really horrible experiences of a child, most children will not remember. Because they don't want to remember. They can't believe, they don't want to believe that it happened to them. So it's almost like it happens to someone, not me. They detach from the experience. This is a phenomenon that no one should know of. Now, in a way, it's actually, I call it sometimes like a psychological hypothermia. Hypothermia is that phenomenon happens with children that once upon a time, children fall, let's say, under ice, very, very cold conditions. So the body goes into some hypothermic state, which was once, unfortunately, mistaken for death. Because all the functions stop working. But it's not death. The close simulation of it is anesthesia, in a way. It's a mysterious state because it's not sleep. Anesthesia is not sleep. When you just sleep and someone sticks a needle into you, you're going to wake up. Anesthesia is some type of comatose state. So hypothermia, until it was discovered, I think it was discovered because there was a child who was taken for dead and they were ready to bury the child, and then they suddenly saw a sign of life. And doctors realized that there's a state that the body goes into such severe shock to protect itself, it will shut down all systems and just preserve some little pilot flame. Just using that as an example. So in a way, it's for preservation of life that this system is shut down in order to preserve the little energy left so the person can revive. Which is really why systems shut down in general in shock or in other type of situations. So psychologically, it's the same thing. When a child endures something very horrible, terrible, it will shut down. And that child will lock himself or herself into a little closet, psychologically speaking, that can remain trapped there. And the child themselves will not even know that person is inside of them. And the rest of their life, they live a life of another person. So another personality takes over. And this is not some type of split personality thing. This is a phenomenon that a child is trying to protect itself. To me, when I first read about it and then I witnessed it in many situations, I saw it as an act of God in a way. In a strange way, but it's like God, of course, would have been healthier if God didn't let parents hurt child in the first place. But when a child is being hurt, it's a way of a child, because a child doesn't have the wisdom to know how to do this. It's a way to protect yourself to protect your most intimate part of yourself from real damage. Which is what a body will do. It's like what a turtle does when it withdraws back into its shell. Psychologically, we will do is when we're hurt, we will withdraw. And it's not that easy to get that person to come out again because they don't feel it's safe. So I don't want to digress, even though this is an important topic, but I want to go back to a more average situation. So all of us have this flame, but life breaks us. And as it breaks us, the flame gets concealed and we don't even have confidence in it anymore. Which is why it's so vital to hear about this. Because half the cure of any illness is awareness. If you don't know you have the potential to not be a victim, that you can take control of your life, you're definitely not going to do anything about it. So the first step is to know you have what it takes. There's nothing that can destroy you. Simple as that. This is fundamental principle of Jewish thinking. Now, you can, if you want to play devil's advocate, you can say, "Can you prove that?" Etc., etc. I'm not here to prove it, even though I can make a case for it. It's a choice you have to make. I would prefer to believe that we have the ability to overcome any challenge. If a person says, "No, I want to be a victim and that's my choice," fine. I'm not going to. How could you debate that? But we do have two choices. To me, the proof is because I've seen it work. I've seen people who have overcome the most harshest of circumstances, and no one can explain why. Viktor Frankl was by no means a man of necessarily religious faith. In his logotherapy, Man in Search of Meaning, he said clearly that the people who had meaning in life were able to endure things that no one else could endure. So it's very, very clear when a person has that confidence in himself, it changes things. Now, even on a very basic, even superficial level, let's say like a sports coach. Some great talents get into a funk, and they get into a place where they lose their confidence in their own skills. And they need a good coach who really has to give them a pep talk. Now, sometimes you start thinking, you have classic stories, whether you think your coach is just manipulating you. But the fact matter, who cares? Maybe you need to be manipulated because your negative voice manipulated you. Now, maybe it's good that someone in a positive voice should manipulate you back. The bottom line, you measure things by results. So our attitudes have absolute impact on our lives. And our attitudes, if you have no confidence in yourself, you may have all the skills in the world, you won't get anywhere. Someone who has confidence in himself may have no skills, even though I don't think that's possible, no skills. But you can get by with a lot less. If you have confidence and less skills, you can do a lot more than a lot of skills and no confidence. That's a pretty basic formula. So here's the story I was going to share, which is, if you want to capture this in real life, Joseph in this week's chapter. And then I ask you to think of somebody in your life that has such an attitude. And that's the people you should hang around with. Here, Joseph, maybe one of the most difficult lives. Talk about dysfunctionality. He's 17 years old. His brothers, in their rage and jealousy, want to kill him. We're not going to get into what the justification they had for that, or they did, they didn't. But that's the bottom line. They almost end up killing him. Instead, they sell him into slavery. They come back and they tell their father that he was killed. Father grieves his favorite son, Joseph. Joseph ends up being taken down to Egypt and living in captivity, difficult circumstances. Ends up in prison, but finally rises to be viceroy of Egypt. Making the long story short. And he turns Egypt into a superpower. Because grain was the commodity of the time. There was a great famine. Joseph, in his foresight, realized and interpreted the dreams properly, and therefore stockpiled the grain, and Egypt was the only source of sustenance. To the point that even Jacob and his sons had to come to Egypt to buy grain from the Egyptians, which is where the story concludes in this week's chapter. So now it's 22 years later. Fast forward. Joseph was sold into slavery. His brothers and family thought gave him up for dead. He rose to great heights, but not with no price paid. I'm sure he would have given up all those heights had he been able to stay with his father and his family, who needs all the pain he went through. And here's the dramatic moment, which some consider to be, as I say, some sages consider to be maybe one of the most noblest acts in history of a human being. What do you think a person after 22 years how much bitterness, how much anger, vengeance, all entitled. He did nothing. There's nothing that he did wrong. It was purely their own jealousy. They said, I'm not getting into what the reasons were, the deeper reasons, the spiritual reasons. There's a whole story behind the story, which is not for now. I talked about this several years ago. You can check it out online. I discussed it. So what's Joseph's reaction? And he had them at his mercy. He was the viceroy of Egypt. Whatever he said went. So the story begins in this week's chapter in a very dramatic fashion, where Joseph, who knew they were his brothers, they did not recognize him, but he recognized them. You know, the story I just said, the soul sees you, you don't see the soul. He saw from behind the curtain, they couldn't see. Because when he was 17, he was still a young boy, they couldn't recognize him. So here he is, plotting to get to his youngest brother, because remember they were brothers with different mothers. They shared the same father. So Jacob and Rachel had two sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph wanted to see Benjamin, so he forced them to bring Benjamin down to Egypt, which was a big trauma for his father as well, because his father had remembered that he lost his first son, Joseph. He didn't want to lose the second one. So Judah takes responsibility, he's the guarantor. He tells his father, I will guarantee the life of Benjamin. Now, without knowing that he's confronting his own brother Joseph, and Judah was the big plotter against Joseph, so the chapter begins very dramatically. Joseph has now taken Benjamin hostage and wants to keep him there. So Judah approaches Joseph and says, we have a father who has lost a son, and I've taken responsibility for this youngest boy. And he says, my soul is bound with his soul, so take me hostage instead of him, because I promised my father that he would return. At this point, the Torah tells that Joseph could no longer control himself. Those are the words. And, he was so touched by how his brother, who wanted to kill him, was ready to give his life for his own younger brother Benjamin. So Joseph sends everyone out of the room, remains with his brothers, and when Joseph then says, I am Joseph, your brother, that's the moment. So you can imagine, if you put yourself in the shoes of the brothers, the shock, the embarrassment, I'm not even talking about fear, but suddenly a brother, what they had done to him. And now what happens next? What does Joseph say? He could have had them killed, could have had them imprisoned, he could have done anything he wanted. So this is what Joseph does. He says to them, do not think don't feel guilty. Do not think it was your fault that brought me here to Egypt. It was God that led me here. In order to save lives. In order to become a source of sustenance to you, to our father, and to the world. Had Joseph not been in Egypt, Egypt would have gone down as well. The famine probably would have killed the world population. Who knows? And Joseph had the presence, the discipline, the humility. Now he wasn't trying to cover up for their sin. Their sin was grave, but he did not become a victim. He wasn't here busy trying to figure out, why did you do this to me? And now let's sit in therapy for the next 40 years, figure out how you could have sold me into slavery. He took a different attitude. He was a man of God, and he did not lose sight of what his father taught him 22 years earlier. And he maintained that, and that's what kept him alive. He realized that no matter what happens to you in life, it's not about blaming someone else. You have to figure it out, what's the plan. It's not always going to work the way you like it. There's not a justification for what took place. As I mentioned, as we read in the story of the 10 martyrs in Yom Kippur, these brothers were responsible. They did a grave thing. Later, as I said, the Roman emperor, who was of course a wicked, cruel person, but then kills 10 of the greatest sages, because he says, what does the Torah say if you kidnap an innocent person and sell him into slavery? It says you should be put to death. So he puts to death Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel and all the people we read about. This happens 1,000 years later. So clearly there was grave sin here that they had to be. But Joseph was not going to become part of this. Because you see, he found freedom. He was not going to become part of this whole thing. My life got screwed up because of everything that happened. he found a way to be free because his flame never was extinguished. And life circumstances were totally not the way he had planned it. It's completely unexpected. And that's what he said to them. So it's a lesson in life. It's a lesson in life of how a person rises. Now, can we all be like Joseph? Well, we have his genes, and we all are descendants of these great people. So there's much that can be learned from this. But you see here a demonstration, a human demonstration of a person who suffered, and did not let suffering destroy his life. And the way he did it was not because he was necessarily stronger than others, is because he was connected to that flame inside and did not let the body and the material circumstances shape his attitude. So I am sure he had his dark nights, and I'm sure he had his pain, and I'm sure he had that, but it didn't control his life. It wasn't like he was oblivious. It wasn't like he said everything is great here. He understood the pain of his life. So this is something that we all have. We have this option. So the first step is you have to realize that this material world is real, but all it is a refrigerator. Nothing more. It's a box. And it's a box, however, that is very, very powerful. It sucks you in, and it makes you think that this is reality. When in truth what the reality is the field of energy that is beneath it all. The flame, the fire, the light. And in essence, really, matter itself is energy. It's not just there's a hand inside the glove. The glove itself is energy. But it's concealed. And number one is engraving inside of you. Studying this, reading it again and again and again. Because as many reminders as you have, as many signposts as you have, the material world still has tentacles that are more powerful than you'll ever imagine. And don't ever become cocky and thinking, I had a moment of inspiration, I see reality, I see the field of energy. Because a second later, you'll forget it all. It's a common experience. I know a guy that was on his deathbed to come to this class. He's alive, thank God. And he was like an interesting character, very spiritual guy. But he had his, he enjoyed his life. He had his material life and he had his spiritual. And he was always, on the fence. Anyway, then he had this serious illness, and they had given up on him. And I remember him telling me in the hospital, now he sees reality. I cannot believe how he's been wasting his years and not doing, right things, and not committing. He had this person who they both loved each other, but he would always not keep the back door open, because he needed to have his options open, his fun, so to speak. And now he sees it all and so on. So I didn't want to be, he was literally on his deathbed, so of course I was very serious about it. But inside of myself I said, I wish God gives him back his life, and let's see what happens. So I said to him, so listen, I hope you hold on to this, because God can bless you as well. Anyway, what happens is, miraculously he recovered. And what do you think happened? Everything that he said that he came to realize, his epiphanies, they're now they're in history. So he still understands we even laugh about it. Because don't underestimate the power of when the door closes. To get inspired is not that difficult, by the way. Maintaining it is very difficult. Maintenance contracts are much more expensive than the initial deal. Because when life takes over, your routines, your habits, your attitudes. If you have a victim attitude, it's not just because you heard a class this evening or you say, I'm going to change that, that's why it changes. You have to continuously, it's a war, literally a war. You have to feed a steady diet of confidence pills, so to speak, of understanding this flame, this soul, which means you have to become more and more familiar with it. Now, there are entire books, Hasidic texts, that talk about the power of the soul. Why is it studied? Because as much as you study, you constantly need to refresh and to remind yourself of another reality. And still then, and even that doesn't mean it solves it all. But at least, as I said, awareness is half the cure. And step 2 is acting on it. Acting on it. I mentioned existential loneliness. Loneliness is only possible when you don't see a field of energy, when you don't see any unity. When you sit alone, and we walk home, at the end of the day we all go home alone, and even people who love you, and people who care about you, there's still a part inside of each of us that is very much alone. Think that no one will ever get you. No one can understand you in that place. And it may even be true. But musical notes are also alone. Each note is a separate note from the other, but they're part of one composition. So the fact of the matter is, matter sees life in particles, in fragmented pieces. Soul sees things like light as a field of energy, as connectedness. Which means when you walk in the street or you meet people, even now right sitting in the room here together, we are all need each other and we're all connected with one another. If you see that all the time, that alone is the best antidote to victim mentality or to loneliness. It's not always someone's going to stimulate you. I'm lonely. Hey, what can you do to entertain me? Jump through some hoops and stuff. Maybe it means the way to fight loneliness is to think of life as being that you need others and they need you, and what are you doing to inspire someone else? See, most people when they're in a lonely state, they take on that. Listen, I'm right now in a weak point. I need someone to stimulate me. I can't stimulate anyone else. That right there is a defeating statement. What do you mean? Why you have the flame inside of you? You can do whatever you want. Maybe times when you're exactly the opposite, precisely when you're not in the mood of helping someone else. Maybe you should, and you'll be amazed what that does. In other words, not get trapped by saying, now I'm in the down mode and let someone else do the giving. Now, obviously, we all deserve times where we can kick off our shoes and someone can take care of us. Yeah, but it doesn't always come in your terms. A person has to take an attitude like Joseph did. You take the bull by the horns and say, what can I do? My life, even if it's difficult, how can it be a source of sustenance? That's what he said. God sent me to save lives. He didn't just say he preserved himself. It was to save lives. And Joseph became proactive. He didn't just, as I said, protect himself and say, you know what, after all I've suffered, I can get away with not doing anything because look at the prices I paid. He took his situation and turned it into a source of life and deliverance to others. That's how a leader thinks. That's how a proactive person thinks. That's how a soul thinks. And a body is a couch potato. It waits for someone else to wake you up. It waits it says, I deserve, today I'm this, so I deserve, after everything I've done, I deserve that someone take care of me. Again, I'm qualifying by saying clearly everybody deserves that, but that let someone else do that. Your attitude has to always be of what can I do to create that type of unity. So the best way to fight loneliness is by not acting lonely. If you have to fake it, so be it. If you really believe and you're really connected to the soul, even though you don't feel it, it's still there. That's why sometimes we have to do things even though we're not in the mood of it. To say I'm only going to do it when I'm in the mood is not always the way it works. So as we come to the end of this year, and as I said, there are many, many things. We can make an entire list of items that I'm sure that can be very negative, very reason for fear, reason for being defeated, and so on. I'm sure you all can come up with a very nice list. So can I. But you can also make another list. Is what can you do? When do you take control? When do you take control of life? And yes, someone say, 1 second, if I lost my job, I don't have money to pay my bills, so how can I suddenly take control? Something, Joseph was that. He almost lost his life, was in prison, and definitely couldn't pay his bills. And he figured it out. Because it wasn't about, who says maybe money is not your salvation at this moment. Maybe it's not just that. Maybe there's something else you need to be doing. Maybe you have to think out of the box. We think in terms of failure and success based on certain preconceived notions. You decide what's success, and then when it doesn't work, you decide, okay, that's failure. Who said? Maybe your definition of success is limited. Maybe you should broaden diversify your portfolio. Maybe there's success in other areas. Maybe a successful marriage. Maybe that's more success than just success in making money. So of course the common answer is, when I have money, I can then get married with security. Okay, back to that. Back to square one. But the point of the matter is, success itself needs to be defined. And as long as we determine that success is based on our definition of it, obviously then when you fail, it's called failure. So then you argue with someone and say, okay, I don't think this is failure. They say, well, it is failure. So you really have to argue with them. It's not what failure is. You have to define what success is before we define what failure is. So really it's an opportunity of really challenging yourself. Maybe there's a different, broader horizons, broader perspectives. And yes, when there are transitions and there are cracks, as Leonard Cohen sings, it's to let the light in. When the egg cracks, a chick is about to be hatched. Is that a bad crack or a good crack? No. Right. If it cracks a few months early, that's not good. Because at that point the egg has to be intact in order for the chick to develop. But when the time comes, the crack has to happen. That's what has to happen. One, you have to shed a layer of skin in order for another one to emerge. And when those layers are shed, it's not always comfortable. Because it always means getting out of your comfort zone. And nobody likes to get out of their comfort zone. You know, after a long night's sleep and you wake up in the morning, the snooze button is an invention in order to not get out of your comfort zone or to delay the need to get out of it, just to use it as an example. I'll take some questions in a moment. So, the classic example of the caterpillar and the butterfly. Caterpillar goes into the catharsis, into the chrysalis and the cocoon, and spends its time until it develops into a butterfly. So there's the analogy, or not analogy, like the anecdote they tell. So a guy sees this cocoon opening up, and he sees a beautiful butterfly trying to struggle itself out of the cocoon. So in his moment of compassion, he says, you know what, why should he have to struggle so much? He goes, takes a pair of scissors, and cuts open the cocoon, and now doesn't have to struggle. The butterfly emerges. But one tragic thing happens. This butterfly cannot fly because the struggling to get out of the cocoon is necessary to pressure liquid into the wings of the butterfly and give it its lift. And because he, so-called, wanted to make it easy for the butterfly, didn't have to struggle, the butterfly, emerged and didn't struggle, but never could fly ever again, or at all. So we don't underestimate what pressure in life does. Obviously, and I say this also as a blessing, we should all have undue pressures in our lives, and this year should be one with not necessarily painful pressures, but pressure itself happens to be one of the healthiest things in life. Imagine what your heart would be like if it had no pressure. I don't think you'd want that. It's called no blood pressure. In mathematics, a straight line is a very efficient entity. It's the shortest point, right? A line is the shortest point between one space to another. But a straight line on a cardiogram is not exactly considered a blessing. You want a heartbeat that looks like this, like a wave. And that's tension and resolution, and there's pressure. Healthy pressure, and then resolution. But pressure. There's no movement without pressure. And when you impose upon yourself the pressure, you don't have to wait for a crisis or some tragedy to bring pressure onto you, which then is not always on your terms. So, I say to you like this, as we enter the year 2012, let us learn from the flames of Chanukah. The Talmud says, we use olive oil, right? So the Talmud uses an expression, a olive does not produce oil until you press it. It needs pressure. So that itself is a lesson. You want to produce light, you need pressure. You want to produce excellence? Excellence is never a result of easy going. People who are good and great, to get to excellence, always need pressure. The greatest talents out there, if they're not pressured, if they're not pushed, can actually get away with a lot of things because they're so good. And there are many people who get away automatically because their natural good is better than a lot of other people. But pressure is what causes excellence to emerge. So it's good to have somebody in your life that can kick you in your pants and that you invite to do so. Someone you can trust, not someone who likes to do it just because they like to kick people. It's always some people, misery loves company. Some people just, like, you check your Rolodex, you check your database, you check your Facebook friends or whatever contact management list. You'll find there's always these people that are great. Whenever you have some enthusiastic moment, you can rest assured you call them up, and they'll make sure to give you a rude awakening of how don't get so excited about your life. You're miserable and you'll always be miserable, you know. And so as the new year comes, maybe one of the resolutions, maybe easier one than losing weight, or some other resolutions that last from January 1st to January 2nd, if at all, is to maybe introduce a few new fresh air in your life, a few new friends, people who you can, who when you're in their presence you feel motivated, you feel uplifted, you feel that you have a flame and potential, not someone who weighs you down or drains you or reminds you, you know that I didn't do so well, so it's all right, you could also not do so well. But some people who really expect and hope and believe in you. And I don't want to go to a radical resolution to cut out all the other types of friends. It's not so easy to do because sometimes we're addicted to our non-affirming support groups. I know that's an oxymoron, but that's how it is. But when the fact is, when you bring new friends in their fresh air, usually a little fresh air actually pushes away toxic air. So maybe the healthy ways, instead of fighting the darkness, bring in a little more light. So automatically there'll be less time and room for those that bring you down a notch. And it's a pretty easy thing to measure. I remember when I was first time, when you grow from a kid into an adult, there's things, epiphanies you have, right? I remember the first time I ever had a meeting. Like, children don't have meetings. Children get together, they play, and that's that. And at some point there's a meeting. This thing is called a meeting. We're going to have a meeting. I don't remember when it was. Maybe it was in camp, having a staff meeting. So I always was a little rabble-rouser, so I said to someone, what's a meeting? Why are we meeting? I right away was skeptical that the guy who's running the meeting wants to figure out a way to make sure we're all kept in line or something. That was the meaning of the meeting. So it's an interesting statement someone told me. An older guy said to me, remember, meetings, most of them are a waste of time. But here's a lesson in life. At the end of the meeting, do you feel drained or do you feel empowered? If you feel drained, it was a bad meeting. If you feel empowered, it was a good meeting. So I always apply that till this day. I have meetings, I always say to myself, okay, what happened at the end of this meeting? Was it draining, or was it, some people just need meetings to mouth off, or to just be heard, or whatever it is. And don't get me wrong, I understand what strategy is, and I understand meetings is, you plan things. I'm not talking about that side of it. So, I'm talking about thinking about your friends. Introduce a few people. When you finish having a conversation with them, you feel confident. You feel more hopeful. It's a pretty good litmus test. Or you don't. And if you don't feel so hopeful, maybe you should find a few friends that make you feel a little hopeful. I don't mean delusional. I mean hopeful. Because there's other extreme as well, of course. There's other extreme. There's some people you can rest assured, you call them, they always give you some dream, some pipe dream they have. But that's also refreshing when things are a little negative. Bottom line is that we have many choices before us. And first thing, you need to know your flame is alive and kicking and waiting for you. You can do something about it. And second is to act on it. Acting is sometimes just making a move. Like I said, it's a new friend, a new experience, try something different. Don't just try the same old thing with the different characters. And if it's not working, you got to look at yourself first. Not as a victim. Look at yourself, what am I not doing right? Maybe I'm just doing the same thing again, I'm thinking I'm doing something different. Ask someone objective if you're really doing something different. It's not so easy to hear that, but very often, I deal with counsel people, and they're always telling me how much they did everything. There must be some omen, or bad omen, or some type of mystical reasons. I said, before we get to mystical reasons, let's deal with the practical. Let's get rid of the usual suspects. Okay. And right away they say, I already did that part. Rabbi, I need you to help me with it. I said, indulge me. And we start creating the list of usual suspects, and of course it's usually one of them. And because our blind spots and our subjectivity don't want to look at certain things. It's much easier to just say it's a mystical mystery. Like that classic Chelam joke where the guy's looking for the keys. So his friend comes over and says, let me help you look for them. He says, okay. They're looking, and he can't find them. He says, where did you lose them? Let's retrace the steps. He says, he points a few hundred yards away. So I said, why are we looking here? If that's where you lost them. He said, because here's where the light is shining. This is used a lot in healing. That people start looking for problems where it's easy to look for them. They never look where it's inconvenient. It's like these good two guys went to see a doctor, and they both had a pain in their leg. And the first guy goes in, and he's yelling and screaming because the doctor's touching it, trying to find out where the nerve is. Anyway, okay, he comes out, fine. The other guy goes in. The other guy wanted to wait and see What's going to happen? And it's quiet, nothing. So he comes out, he says, how'd you pull that off? He says, I gave him the other foot, He didn't give him the bad foot. So he went in, yes, he went away with no pain, but they didn't solve anything either. So, it's we don't like to look where the dark is. We like to look where it's light. That's why we need each other. Each of us can point out things. And it's not always so comfortable, I always, they say about writers and speakers, that they're the only people that never do tshuva. Tshuva is they never inspire to repent, inspire to correct their ways. Why? Because every time they hear a good inspiring story, instead of taking it to heart, they say, great material for my next article. They project it. So I have my own traps in this regard, because I can talk about this, about going to other people for assistance. The question is whether I actually do it or not. We have to figure that one out. But the point is that it's also something that sometimes in your mind is the right thing to do. It still doesn't mean you do it. So I'm just using some examples. I have no doubt if you set your mind to it, you think about this metaphor, Chanukah metaphor, light, dark, flame, matter, energy, and so on, you can find many ways to become a field of energy instead of a dead weight. And when you start acting that way, it changes things, in you and in others. And you don't have to wait for any committee meeting. You don't need to wait for any someone else is going to do it for you. It's you and you alone. That's how you start doing it. You want to teach someone to swim, enough lectures. You jump into the water, and you know what? In the beginning it may not go so easily, but then you do it once, twice, 3 times, you start swimming. Yeah, you want some technique? Fine, you get some technique, but it's not the technique, it's getting in there. And that's not so easy to do. And of course, the big question that I'll probably get some emails after this class is, okay, what happens if I have fear to jump into the water? So you need to find someone that you know, or that you trust, or find someone you could trust, that helps you get beyond that fear. And sometimes it's going to take, frankly, a push. It doesn't always happen with talk. Sometimes you simply need to just bind yourself and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. One of my tricks is, I commit myself to things with somebody or with a team or a group of people, and I can't get out of it as much as I like to. I'm stuck with good things, and then that's it. Once you can't just you're already committed. Then there's a whole people invested, etc., etc. So that's one of the tricks of the trade as well. So with that being said, I am confident in all of you. I see a bunch of flames here burning, souls of fire. But trapped in our own little minutia, concrete or marble. And like Michelangelo said, I see the angel trapped in the marble, I carved and set her free. That's what we're able to do. And that's what good friends can do, and hopefully we can do for each other. Hopefully I can help you a bit, and you can help me set our angels free. So, that being said, being that this is the conclusion of Chanukah, and we're going into a new year, a new secular year, a new tax year, whatever you want to call it. I want to wish everybody a illuminating year. And yes, we don't know what the twists and turns. We're not prophets. We have no crystal ball. But we can learn from Joseph. You don't need a crystal ball to control your destiny. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't trust a crystal ball even if it were true. You control your destiny by your attitude. A good swimmer does not need to know every twist and turn of a complex sea. A good swimmer needs to know they have confidence that they can handle anything. And if a storm comes, sometimes you just tread water. You don't fight the tide. And then when it's calmer, you thrust forward. So it's about maneuvering, it's about navigating. So I want to bless everyone with those tools. You have the tools. Accessing them and helping each other do so. And please see me as an ally, a friend, Meaningful Life Center. This class, all the classes now, thank God, we're broadcasting all over the place. All kinds of instruments and platforms. We had a few emails, people watching, you can see it on an iPhone, you sent me, right? A cafe in Miami. I was looking if anybody has any underwater scuba diving, maybe watching this class while they're doing that. Maybe we can create a series of interesting places. But please see me, as I said, an ally. If you have any ideas to me of how we can broaden the work, expand and reach, I'm more than happy to hear Any thoughts from you? And if you haven't left your email address, please do so we can stay in touch and contact. I send out a weekly email. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow, 7 p.m. Okay, Philip, my good friend Philip Namaworth. Anyone wants details, you can ask Velvel or myself. Velvel is the cute guy standing in the doorway. What else can I say? Again, let me say the class dedicated and to Maria, Devinki, Malcah, Chana, Rifka, and Shlomo. And may you and your family all have only simchas and joy in your life. And as I mentioned to you, it's like when the passing of a soul moves on, it doesn't leave. You are now you carry the responsibility. So together with the pain comes responsibility, the legacy. And so your grandmother works through you guys. That's the bottom line. If you think of it that way, it's like, and I remember when my father passed away, it was painful, it's still painful. You want to connect, but when you understand that yourself as becoming the arms and legs and you can continue on things that were inspired by the person you loved, it's extremely empowering. And it's not just a nice consolation, it actually is a power. So now her soul has to work through your bodies, basically. And everyone here should only have simchas and good occasions, happy occasions. But even when there's a few challenges, we can see that also as opportunities. So, thank you. It's an honor to share a few words with you, and always great to know you all, and our flames and souls and musical notes intersecting. So, thank you very much.